Hey out there, and welcome to another Kevin Strong show. We have almost 9 million Americans that are working at least two jobs just to keep their head above financial water. We're going to talk about that in this show. We're going to talk about a graph that goes back a little bit of ways. It's going to show how there is a bifurcation between the number of people increasingly finding part time work versus full time work. And the last time the gap has been that wide, you have to go back to the great financial crisis. What if we don't have a housing market crash? What if commercial real estate starts to stabilize in 2026? What if ultimately the bubble that pops is the inability for the average homeowner and the average American to maintain a quality of life? And maybe we've been missing the boat all along and looking at this thing the wrong way. So if you're new to the show, welcome. This is going to be informative. Thanks again for all of you who are subscribing to the channel. If you've not subscribed, please do so at this time. If you do enjoy this video at the end, please show some appreciation by hitting the like button. And yes, we have hit over 1,000 subscribers. I'm happy, or as my mom used to say, happier than a punk in a penitentiary. So without further ado, we're going to slide over here and look at this article briefly that talks about, the article said basically 8.7. So I just rounded up. There's 8.7 million people that are working two jobs, as I said at the intro of this video. The number is the highest since the pre-pandemic and is growing by hundreds of thousands per month. In October of 2024, the number was just under 8.4 million jobs. And they're saying here in this article, the discrepancy, who's getting hit the hardest: sectors with lower wages, where employees often need a second job to cover basic costs. This is true, but I also think recently, the high rise of inflation, the high cost of home ownership has hit white collar jobs as well. There's been plenty of articles that have been put out on YouTube talking about this phenomenon, that the middle management sector and our working class is no longer immune from massive layoffs, from massive wage cuts. Everybody's job is on the chopping block, so to speak, no pun intended. AI is a threat, probably more so to middle and upper management than lower management. But conversely, when you're on the lower scale of an organizational chart, you're probably more in line to be affected by inflation. You know, if you have a higher wage, you can kind of fight that off a little bit for a longer period of time, but it really squeezes you at both ends if you are in a lower wage bracket. The article continues down here, and it says, while the stock market may be rallying, the reality for millions of Americans tell a different story. One where financial stability remains elusive despite holding down multiple jobs. The implication of this trend are far-reaching, impacting consumer spending, which I've just talked about. Mental health, we don't talk enough about that, that silent stress, and the overall quality of life. As the market continues to celebrate the strong jobs reports, which I think is a bunch of BS, the spotlight must also be turned to the struggles of those working tirelessly behind those numbers. So you can have multiple jobs, multiple part-time jobs. And as far as the US government statistics go, they kind of look at that as you're just employed, but who's really gainfully employed? I think there was a census, the US Census went back in 2022, said that there was almost, 38 million Americans who were living at or below the poverty level. And generally speaking, the poverty line has also been largely criticized as an ineffective way to measure poverty. They say that's not a way to measure poverty. There's probably a lot of truth to that, because there's a lot of people who are functioning working class people, but still are not making ends meet, which goes to the narrative as why almost 9 million people are working multiple jobs and they still can't get their head above water. I think you're talking about prices of college. Houses have been historically outpaced inflation substantially. The price of higher education and the price of a home has far exceeded the rate of inflation and has exponentially far exceeded the rate in which wages have gone up, because wages are not keeping up with inflation. So I think those who have two jobs often express probably the inability to meet their basic needs. It makes it very difficult for them to get ahead. As I said earlier, home ownership requires for some people a decent amount for a down payment to purchase, unless you go FHA, which is 3% down. If you're lucky enough to be a veteran, you can get into a house with basically no money down. But for the majority of folks out there, home ownership has become a pipe dream. I also did some research and found out that there's a rising amount of people that are selling their blood and plasma. You know, I think at one point a couple years ago, it was at 8%. I think it's getting close to maybe like 12% or 11%. And hell, that's almost in line with the poverty line. So things are really, really, really getting nasty out there. I want to share with you a graph that kind of illustrates the growing trend between where part-time work is going up and where full-time work is going down. And there's this bifurcation. There's a gap. And that's not healthy. So we're going to look at that before we wrap up today's show. So let me go ahead and pull that up for you guys. And once again, I do appreciate you guys who are subscribing, liking the videos. It's really, really, really helping my channel pick up some steam and grow. So let me see if I can pull this up for you guys. You should be able to see this here in full view. So we're going to talk about this, what this basically is. So the purple line, as you can see here, is 35 hours or more as far as the federal government's concerned, as far as watching stats. You're pretty much considered full-time employment. Less than 35 is part. So as you see here, I'm going to go back. You see there's a big gap here. This was during the dot-com bubble, for those of you who were old enough, who were around at that time. And as you see, when the dot-com bubble hit, full-time work, the purple line at the top, drastically went down, and part-time work picks up. Very simple graph to understand. The more part-time work you have to secure, that's a clear indication that the economy is not stable, and inflation is a problem for the average American worker. You see another big bifurcation or a big division leading up to 2008, which was the great financial crisis. And then once that hit, the graph tells the story again, ladies and gentlemen. Look here. At 2008, the dark purple line, this full-time employment, drastically went down and full-time employment went up. And this thing didn't start to pick up from a full-time employment perspective till around 2012. Sorry about that. Got a little tongue-tied. Ironically, as you can see, full-time work picking up from 2010 to 2012, this is also the launch pad of when housing in aggregate across the United States started to come up with this, what we call the support line, and start to take off. 2012, once again, this is in aggregate, so don't leave a comment saying my market never went down. We know there were some outliers, but by and large, the housing market overall, after the great financial crisis, did not start to rebound and show some momentum till around 2012. This is illustrated by how full-time employment started to pick up from 2010 to 2012. And as you can see here, it's been robust all the way up until we had the healthcare crisis, and then it significantly dropped down. Part-time work significantly dropped down. But since the pandemic, what you see here is that systematically full-time work is going down, part-time work is picking up, and we haven't seen a gap this wide since around 2008. And that's why I said at the beginning of this video, ladies and gentlemen, housing may or may not crash. The devil's always going to be in the details. Time will tell. But if we go from inflation to disinflation, which is what I think, this is not financial advice, that's what I think is going to happen the latter half of this year. I think we're going to be in a recession. It's going to be deep, long, and wide. There's going to be an emergency meeting held by the Fed. They're going to start to cut rates. I do not believe the narrative that they're only going to cut once or twice in 2025. Nope, nope, nope. By the second quarter, or starting by the second or third quarter of this year, the Fed's going to be cutting rates and cutting rates fast. But I think that's going to result in disinflation, not deflation, which means prices are still going to be high, but they're going to come down a little bit, but not to the point where your wages are going to be able to secure a quality of life for you and your family. And that's why I said at the beginning of this video, it really doesn't matter if housing pulls back or not, because until it pulls back to the point where the average worker can afford a home, which historically speaking, I think is somewhere around 3 to 3.5 times your annual income, home ownership for the average American is going to be a pipe dream. So always, always, when you can, rent when it makes sense to rent, especially if you can rent for the same neighborhood that it would cost for home ownership. Find a way to pay down your debt. These part-time jobs are not helping. I understand that, but people have to ride this out and come up with creative ways to bridge that gap and keep up with inflation, because I think we're in for a rocky, long ride. That's going to do it for the end of the Kevin Strong Show. If you enjoy this episode, please leave a comment. Hit the like button. If you have not subscribed, please continue to do so, because it is helping my channel grow, and I greatly appreciate it. I'm going to end with my famous slogan: keep your credit score up and your debt down, or it'll make you a clown. Have a great weekend. This is January 24th, 2025, and I'll see you in the next one.